You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. My guest in the studio, President of the Ghana Union of Traders Association, Joseph Obeng, President of the Association of Ghana Industries, Dr. Humphrey Ayim Dake. We also are joined by economist Kwame Pianim and Dr. Lloyd George Edu Amwa, Center for Asian Studies, University of Ghana, Legon, and Dr. Theo Echampong, political risk analyst. We are asking what can be done so that these policies do not end up rather collapsing the economy further than what the economy has suffered. So, good morning. Thank you all very much for making time to join us here to do the Lord's work. Now, I'm going to ask Kwame Pianim and our other guests to hold on for us. I want to listen to the leaders of the business groups who have been speaking about how businesses are going to suffer because of these three bills, and then we'll bring you on to digest what it is that their concerns are. So you say that the passage of these three new bills, the Income Tax Amendment Bill, the Excise Duty Amendment Bill, and the Growth and Sustainability Amendment Bill, are inimical to businesses, and their passage has ushered in the imminent collapse of several businesses. How do you explain that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope everybody understands this point, that overtaxation impedes on progress of businesses. It's as simple as that. This government realizes that, and that's why in 2017, when they assumed power, they removed what is called the nuisance taxes. And now these nuisance taxes are creeping back in force and in other forms. And now it is so much, bringing a huge burden on businesses to the extent of collapse. And that's why we are saying that we cannot take it any longer. We cannot bear it any longer. Normally, if a new tax is being introduced, we have stakeholders engagement so that we all evaluate the tax that is coming, if it will destroy businesses or otherwise. The inputs that businesses will do is very important and significant. We never did something, and these bills are being introduced again, which is going to destroy business. In fact, these taxes are counterproductive, even against the government's own quest of industrialization. The Growth and Sustainability Levy is going to make us pay multiplicity of taxes, which is not acceptable. Because if communication industries, the insurance industries, the banking industry, the shipping lines, and what have you, are going to pay 5% on their gross, it means that they are going to treat it as an expenditure and pass it on to businesses that apply their services. And that also, we have to contend with 2.5 on our gross also. And so when that happens, it means that we are completely out. Already, the business that we do not do it in isolation. We are doing it in competition with the neighboring countries, with the continental free trade area. We are completely irrelevant and we are out of it because the cost of doing business is extremely very high. Even among the cross-border trading activities that we do along the West Africa sub-region, we are also losing out. Even to Togo, that's why you hear so many people going to Togo to buy goods every now and then. Only last 10 days or so, Gapoha called us, GPHA, called us into a meeting and saying that the Tama port is almost empty and that we should come and brainstorm why and how we can restore confidence in the port again. He said it's because people are frustrated with the cost of doing business in the port. And the port is not also working in isolation. They are into competition with left Cote d'Ivoire and the right Togo. And so if your cost of doing business is high, then you see that people are going to that side. And then also excess taxation also leads to smuggling and all that. So it means that people then do not come through the mainstream port and then go through other areas. Let's talk about inflation. The inflation that we are experiencing here now in Ghana is as a result of accumulation of cost. And it's too much a burden for the consuming public as well as the trading community, because trading thrives on turnover. And that if your turnover is curtailed, but because the consuming public's the purchasing power has been lessened because of the inflation that we have, are unable to buy the volumes that they used to buy. It means that we are unable to service our loans because your turnover is curtailed. So if you look at all these things, then we're surprised. That's why we show our disapproval to Parliament for passing this law, because this is a law or bill that was coming that all trade associations, trade organizations have come and protested. That if you do this, we are already overburdened. The taxes that have been increased since 2021, the COVID pandemic, the effects on businesses were more than anything else. And that's even with the COVID pandemic, we were made to pay a tax on the COVID itself. What is more nuisance than this? There's no precedent anywhere in the world that the businesses were made to pay.
The understanding is that we are not in normal times. So you can't expect things to be in the period when taxes were being removed for being nuisance taxes. The growth and sustainability levy, as we understand, is 5% of profit before tax, correct? And those who are affected are the banks, the non-bank institutions, insurance companies, the telcos, breweries, inspection companies, bulk oil distributors, and the OMCs. And then you have 1% gross. That's what you are talking about. 1% gross production. That's for the mining companies and upstream oil and gas companies. And then you have 2.5% of profit before tax. That is supposed to be what affects everybody else.
Like us.
Right. And this is expected. The purpose is to generate as much as 4 billion, as we understand, to cushion the economy and in these dire circumstances.
So is there no other alternative to this? Because the IMF itself does not seek the destruction of businesses. The intention of IMF to salvage us from our problem. And then the efforts of IMF to relieve us from this problem will amount to nothing when at the end of the day businesses are destroyed. And that's why we do not adopt this, we disapprove on this tax. Because we could have adopted alternatives. And that's why we were calling for stakeholder engagement, so that we will also will build consensus, and then we arrive at any necessary alternative that could save the nation and also save the generality of businesses at that. And we are not asking nothing. Because IMF did not impose this type of taxes on us. It is our own bargain. And that's why if we are sat down, we could have preferred even better alternative for us to send it to IMF, rather than this one that impedes against growth itself. Already, when taxes are taken from the left, the interest rate is also taken from the right. You are borrowing at the rate of 40+%. And then all these taxes are piled up on you. VAT used to be 3%. And now we are migrating into the standard rate, which will accumulate to about 22%. All other taxes. So it's not that we are not paying these taxes. Let me tell you, businesses have not performed badly. For the past couple of years, Ghana Revenue Authority have been exceeding its revenue target. And so if they have been exceeding their revenue target and government is still in want, then government have to put its expenditure in check. Because we are doing our best. Or if government still seek from us, then we have to expand the tax net, because just a few of us are paying these taxes and is breaking the backs of businesses. Ghana Revenue Authority itself have said that about 13 million Ghanaians have the capacity to pay taxes, but only about 5 million is captured into the tax net. So do we have to push all this problem at the back of these few people that is paying? That's why I say we could adopt prudent and pragmatic and efficient tax collecting mechanism that will rope in a lot more people into the tax net, that will ensure compliance. Because the taxes that we are paying is already enough. If we have compliance, and then most people, because even the VAT that we pay in this country, about only 20% are charging the VAT, and about less than 10% of the generality of Ghanaians are collecting VAT invoices. If you want, you are a journalist, go run and ask any in the street who have a VAT invoice. They don't have. And then we use VAT also to develop the country. So it's about ensuring efficiency, adopting prudent and pragmatic measures to enrope in a lot more to pay these taxes, plugging the loopholes. There are a lot of loopholes in the warehousing system, in the free zone system. We have to, and then the tax exemption policy, where there are huge abuses there. He said that if you're able to do it well and even cancel the tax exemption policy, only to you to apply when it is necessary, we can be saving about 2 billion only there, and then plugging the loophole. So if we sit down with government and then we all we all build consensus, at the end of the day, we can bring even a much better alternative that may not necessarily kill the local industries, as we are saying.
You will need to demonstrate practically beyond the figures and the global talk how exactly these 3 tax introductions and amendments will impact on your business. You have said, first of all, that you will be forced to also ensure that whatever you have to pay, it is the consumer that will pay. And already we can't afford. So that means a lot of trouble. But I want you to, help us here. As we understand, the tax revenue value in 6 years is a total of about 300 billion Ghana cedis that the government has raked in. In 2017, 33.6 billion. In 2018, almost 40 billion. In 2019, 45.6 billion. In 2020, 47.4 billion. In 2021, 57 billion. And then in 2022, we had 75 billion. So the problem is not that of lack of revenue, but we are not in normal times. Should you be complaining that the government is increasing the burden on businesses and the people?
Yes, we should be complaining. Samson, thank you for the opportunity. First and foremost, AGI recognizes the headwinds, significant ones, of course, both international and domestic, affecting the Ghanaian economy. And we also appreciate the concern of government to secure an IMF bailout to bring about stability and confidence in our economy, respectively to the macro space that we all yearn to see, so that we can get effective planning. And as you've asked the question, what is the major concern of industry? Our major concern has been that thou shalt not sacrifice the growth of industry at the expense of the IMF agenda, which is clearly an objective of government. And considering the state of affairs, it is the priority of government. But beyond securing this, if thou secures it through sacrificing the growth, there are consequences. So in our conversation and your prayer to government, we sought to demonstrate the consequences of this. And that leads to the subject matter of the taxes collected over the period, that it isn't a matter of the revenue, but the budget demonstrates that there's always a deficit position of government, irrespective of the revenue. So getting revenue is one arm of it. The second is the expenditure. So where the expenditure and the revenue has a gap, which is then established by deficit, which is always demonstrated in the budget, it does, even the government will have a target through its various revenue angles. The question is this sufficient to meet its expenditure target? And once that is not the case, then government still needs more revenue. And it will see the infrastructural development requires and the needs. And these needs are all captured under a least developing economy. The characteristics of a least developed economy are unique, and therefore the demands are excessive. When you see the urban drift, I once upon a time watched the Miracle Schools. There was a documentary you did, and the schools, some had chairs, some did not, and the question became a very contentious issue. It has to do with unavailability or insufficient infrastructure. In the context of a least developing economy, the urban drift and then the rural drift and the population boom, all those characteristics affects the context of a developing economy. And therefore, you will not at any point in time have enough money or enough revenue to satisfy all. It becomes a subject matter of priority. How do you prioritize? Same then comes to the context of what we're discussing, that as we seek to secure the IMF deal, we're still waiting for the terms of the deal because of the external factors. That could also shape the trajectory of governance and the economic model we seek to build. So in this set context, AGI's concern is that if you seek to sacrifice growth using the excise duties, it makes industry uncompetitive. It leads to low growth, it leads to unemployment, it leads to informality of the economy. It leads to what? Low taxation. It opens the door for more importation. It puts more pressure on the CD. It distorts the economic formula that you seek to do what we call the structural transformation. The structural transformation will elude you by virtue of these dynamics. How do you correct it? So our biggest concern is that if growth is short change, but experts will say stagflation will come in. What are these consequences into the future? I suggest and I'll profess that if we go with the structure as has been tabled and as has been approved, that will automatically anchor the 18th IMF deal into the future. Because the structures as has been laid out will not give us the room to be export-oriented. The export orientation that we seek to push to export and get more revenue in terms of dollars to balance our deficit will not be the case. So we're looking at this and we are looking at the consequences of what is being rolled out for the sake of IMF. I believe in our conversation and proposition to government is, yes, my brother here has mentioned a number of issues, deepen the compliance level. The EVAT that government has introduced, and currently government is putting in place framework to roll out about 600 companies. That will be significant. And when they did the pilot, it is evident how revenue jumped. So we believe that is one way of deepening compliance. Secondly, he mentioned the exemption bill that has been repealed and then being recalibrated. We know there are implementation challenges. Some SOEs, some institutions are having difficulties through the 6-month exemption policies and the procedures. That will be perfected. That we believe will be another vehicle to rake in significant revenue. And then I mentioned the EVAT, I mentioned the exemption, and recently the utility companies have done a lot of adjustment in their pricing. That is also affecting the same companies that are producing the beverages, and in that space, most of them will be affected by the excise duty. We should realize that IMF being Agenda 1, inflation is Agenda 2 to government. So right after that, government will seek to reduce the inflationary target. But with the taxes rolled out, that will also trigger inflation. So how do you seek to reduce Agenda 2, which is the inflationary basket? And in the inflationary basket, food and non-food items form one of the significant drivers, including fuels, including other ones that the government statisticians have stated. So our biggest concern is if you roll out this policy as it is, the future will be challenging. And then the same companies that you seek to rake in this 4 billion out of will be challenged that as we are frustrated, same will be that government might not meet its intended agenda of raking in the 4 billion. So yes, the revenue basket is being raked in per government's target with its revenue or handles. But what is the expenditure basket as a least development economy? We have several challenges to attain. So I associate myself on a number of issues with our being, and we believe we can engage government, and as we're giving alternatives, that those will be routes that we believe will not be destructive. As much as the macroeconomic indicators as it is now is pervasive and then very intrusive, like the inflationary basket that is distorting our operations and cost of doing business. By virtue of these taxes, especially the excise duty, we do not conform even to the West African Economic Bloc. The West African Economic Bloc excise duty rate is between 1 to 10%. And as we roll ours between 20 to 50, we are out of line. And therefore, it opens the borders, and there'll be a lot of imports. Obin will be excited about that, but that will put a lot of pressure on the exchange rate. And as that does, the ramifications and the consequences will be dire for our country.
Kwekwe Nchugwesiaku has a way, of summarizing things and sharing his views on them in a very, nice way. And he said that the AGI doesn't get it. At this point, every government policy has just one objective: to secure an IMF program to sustain the government through the next election cycle, hoping to hoodwink Ghanaians to give them another term. The government is not thinking beyond securing an IMF program. Nothing else rings a bell in their ears anymore. Just the same way they didn't listen to sound advice almost 2 years prior to having to swallow their pride and dash to the IMF with Usain Bolt's speed. Then he explains the point. The ones they kill off local production on the trajectory AGI is warning about and making us import dependent, the cedi will need annual injection of foreign currency to avoid depreciation, which is what they were doing before, borrowing from the international capital markets to provide artificial strength to the currency. They would never have gone to the IMF except for being shut out of the capital markets, which caused the pack to crumble. Once we exit the program, they can go back to their old ways and IMF can't say jack. They are not thinking beyond IMF. Otherwise, they will be more concerned about winning us off imports, not the other way around. As long as we are import dependent, we will forever remain in this vicious cycle. Now, my question to my panelists who are joining us via Zoom and via phone. So, Mr. Kwampieni, my question is, government clearly knows better. It must be aware of the dire consequences and fears expressed by the business leaders. It certainly won't plan to plunge the already battered economy into more trouble, correct?
I guess that if you are a government and you think that you know better than your citizens, then you are in trouble. You do not. And this is why I'm surprised hearing from the AGI that there was no stakeholder consultation on these taxes. If you take the growth and sustainability, fiscal sustainability levy that the government is planning on bringing on, it is going to be paid into the consolidated fund, and it's for 3 years. You know, it seems as if it's just another lie or fit to hoodwinkle the Ghanaian. You know, if I would have applauded this tax, if the government is saying, look, because of the past recklessness that we've been involved in, our tax revenue is not able to cover interest rate payments, salaries and wages and so forth and services. And therefore, we are putting aside a certain amount, no matter how small, 4 billion, take it as $400 million, that will be used for growth, which means it was going to be set aside for, let's say, transforming agriculture, for agro-processing, for minimizing importation of foodstuff and so forth. This is the beginning. But it doesn't seem to be true. That's what they want to do. Why 3 years? After 3 years, then they would have attained Singapore status, so we don't need the money anymore. If the argument is that we need to raise our tax revenue to a certain level, comparable with other countries, so that we get the IMF program, fine. Let's tell the Ghanaians that's what we are trying to do. But let's go back and say, who are the people who are contributing to tax revenue? The numbers we give are not verified. Cocoa farmers pay about 30% of their turnover as tax. They are paid at best 70%, 60%, 65% of the FOB price of cocoa. The assumption is that Cocoa Board will take 5%, 10 percentage points of that for the input that they supply to them. The rest of the money should be given to the Ghana government. How many cocoa farmers are there? Are they part of the people who are paying rent? They are not, obviously, because government has set up Cocoa Board as a cost center. They don't contribute cocoa farmers' revenue to the airport. Cocoa Board has now overborrowed for what I do not understand. They are bankrupt now. And government says, don't worry, we've brought the Cocoa Board debt to the government, to the public debt, and that's what we are trying to pay. The argument made by the AGI is that the domestic debt exchange is taking a lot of money from the banks. Their liquidity, the ability is going to go down. How are they going to make the profit for us to be able to take that money from them? And if this levy is based on your profit before tax, why didn't we just add it to the existing tax so that businesses are not being asked to file other administration of this levy? These are difficult times. Businesses are difficult surviving. You are adding additional administrative burden onto them. It doesn't. We should not do that. The revenues that we are collecting, you bring a lot of uncertainties. When you say oil, gas, and so forth, you know, this government has been in power for 6 years almost. Not one plan of development has been approved for the oil sector. And you are adding an additional uncertainty, whether new ones coming in are going to be subject or even the existing ones outside agreements with us are going to be subject to these new levies. My suggestion is that, yes, we need to do certain things to get an IMF coverage, but we should not sacrifice growth. We want to bring our debt level to a certain percentage of GDP. The domestic debt exchange, as structured now, declining. Why are we not only at 3 years when Kenoforiata is no longer in power, when Nana Akufo-Addo is no longer in power? Is that the extent of the life of this country? We have to take our time and look, how are we going to survive? Revenue is not a problem. We didn't have oil revenue. We're surviving. We have oil, we're having problems. The oil of it to be used to support the budget. All this, are these also added to the tax revenue, or we don't add them to the tax revenue? So let's sit down quietly and decide, where are we, where do we want to be, and how do we empower our businesses? I'm told the African Continental Free Trade Area, just because the head office is in Ghana, doesn't mean that we are going to benefit. Rwanda, Kenya are busy building ports, airports, which will stock a lot of goods. We just become a captured importer of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are not going to benefit. The free zones will go to Côte d'Ivoire and go to Togo. We may not benefit, but the time has come for us to sit down. Don't let's just look at the IMF program, where to get the $3 billion to support it. What about cutting expenditures? So let us look at this economy beyond Kenoforiata and Nana Akufo-Addo. Look at the economy 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. That's my advice. The way we are going is not the right. Normally, before you come out with taxes, you come out with the idea, you float it, then there's a green paper, people discuss it, people give the ideas, then the government says, I've heard you. This is my white paper.
Right.
We
So
don't,
what will be your suggestion further? What should be done in regard to these bills that have already been passed? Because that's their concern. They and like you also share in their concern, perhaps they shouldn't have been passed at all. Now they have been passed. What should happen? The AGI is listing a number of challenges that is confronting industries. It is talking about electricity tariffs that have shot up significantly on 2 occasions, totaling a whopping 56.5% within less than 6 months. They say that the beverages sector cannot absorb water tariff increment over 300%. You know, and all of these, they say, are contrary to government's ambitious, revenue projection, which largely hinges on the performance of industry. So they foresee a contraction in manufacturing and other related business activities. What should be done? These have already been passed.
His Excellency President Nana Akufo-Addo should refuse to sign these bills. Obviously, Parliament did not ask the right questions. I mean, this Parliament is going to go down in history as one of the worst parliaments we've ever had. They don't ask questions. They pass all the bills for borrowing money that led us into this problem. This government, by procurement, interested in just the more projects we have, the better for people to make money. Cocoa board projects, and they are not even wondering about how bankrupt they put the organization in. They are thinking about building a new headquarters. It doesn't make sense. We have to say, look, enough is enough. The president should not sign these bills. The assumption was that when the Minister of Finance has done its work, obviously they have to have an economic model, which is after the domestic debt exchange, what is the economy looking like? what is it going to be? Are we going to have depression, low economic growth for the next 3-5 years? And if so, what is going to happen to government revenue? Nobody seems to be looking at that. And then it goes to Parliament. We expect parliamentarians to consult their people, think about it, and ask questions. They obviously don't. They just pass them. So our last hope is for the president to say, thank you, Parliament, I will not sign this bill because it's not good. Look at the excise taxes. The ad valorem. It says 2 US cents. The government tells us, don't dollarize the economy. They are dollarizing it. Can you imagine if the city is unstable? Every week, manufacturers will have to adjust their prices because the city dollar rate has changed. And therefore, your excise, which is based not on cedis, but in dollars, will also change. Does it make sense? We are building inflation into this system. I think that it's not well thought of. The president should not sign it. Parliament should think again. And we should tell the IMF, look, our tax revenue is not comparable with other countries. There are a whole lot of revenues that are not there. You know, part of the revenue was supposed to be set aside for Ghana Education Trust Fund to build infrastructure so that in case nothing is happening, at least some infrastructures are being built in the schools. What did we do? We went and said, Dachi, borrowed against it. Now that is part of the debt that is going to be pushed, that is being restructured. Electricity, levies, we're paying. And that is also part. The electricity we didn't consume, the electricity the government frivolously does to people, and the water they does to people during the COVID. $3 billion came in. Why didn't you use part of that to cover it? Instead of saying, oh, the government is going to give free water, free electricity. And then that is also part of the debt that we are restructuring now. Look, we should be straightforward with the people of Ghana. We should be transparent. We should not tell a lie. This levy has nothing to do with growth. It has nothing to do with fiscal sustainability. It's a lie.
Before you take leave of us, we are going to China begging, hoping that they may forgive us of the 1.7 billion United States dollars that we owe them. We have a Eurobond, debt of $13 billion dollars. We owe our multilateral, partners $8 billion. The Paris Club countries 1.9 billion, and then with some other countries we have 3.2 billion. That's in excess of 20 billion that we owe in United States dollars. So we are in extraordinary times. We are not in normal times. Something must be done, and it will not be the usual approach.
My friend, you are talking about extraordinary times. We walked into these times with our eyes open. Do we have floods? Have we have hurricanes in Ghana? Did we have Ebola? What did we have? We had a Minister for Finance who borrowed, and Parliament that supported him to borrow. Borrowed. We are 66 years old as an independent country. We have now somebody from the U.S. Treasury sitting in the Ministry of Finance to hold Ken Ofori-Attah's hands. Ken told me once, we went to school with these same white boys. We are just as good as them. Now he has somebody sitting there holding his hand, giving him tutorials in what? And we have somebody being paid by a Swiss franc sitting in Bank of Ghana. Our governor was out giving advice to other countries. We should be ashamed of ourselves, 66 years old. And we are being recolonized. Why can't the Americans help us by appointing a governor general to come and govern for us? And appoint 5 lawyers so that we can send home the 275 parliamentarians, and those 5 lawyers will make our bills for us. Look, we are matured enough. We should not run to Daddy and say, there is no Father Christmas. Let us make haste slowly, as the Romans used to say. Let's sit down now and say, how do we cut our coat according to our cloth, so that every 4 years we don't run to the IMF. Projects. Why projects? Every project in Ghana costs double the price. Why? Because of incompetence and corruption. The German ambassador was telling us, show us, we are going to help you, but show us that we are doing something. Cut some expenditures. Have we cut any? We have more ministers than the US, UK, Germany. Who is there? Where is Father Christmas? As far as I'm concerned, nobody should give us any debt forgiveness. They should structure it, we should pay. So next time somebody is borrowing like there's no tomorrow, we'll tell them, stop borrowing because you have to pay. I was hoping that this growth and sustainability levy was going to set aside some money that will create income, a stream of income, so that revenues are being created. We are now having used manufacturing companies. Now you want to put a levy, SI duty, on the juices. After you clubbed people and somebody dies, they go to the funeral. You know, when they give you a Fanta, when you go to a funeral, you pay a donation equivalent to that. Now you are going to put levies on Fanta and Coca-Cola, just like on spirits and so forth. And then on these cigarettes, when somebody is changing from cigarettes, you use these electronic devices. You say you are going to put a levy or SIG also on those ones. Why? You don't want people to transition. And the monies we are collecting, are you going to put it aside to cure cancer, or it goes into the consolidated fund for you to spend on your project? Look, the government should say that the next 2 years, they are not going to make any money on any project. We are all in this together.
Okay.
They should also make sacrifices, like Ghanaians are making sacrifices.
All right. Thank you so very much. Mr. Kwampiani is an economist, and you just heard him loud and clear. He's been very consistent about the need to do the things that we can do locally and sensibly to reduce the burden, stop the spending that is not necessary as well. Now, I'm bringing into Dr. Theo Champong in here very briefly, but before I bring him in, I want you to take a listen to this, that our situation is not one that we are talking about locally, and that among our peers and internationally, we have become the butt of jokes about the way we are managing our economy. Dr. Donald Kaberuka, a former president of the African Development Bank Group, cited Ghana, he didn't want to mention the name Ghana, as an example of a promising economy that is now failing and resorting to the IMF for rescue. He was speaking at a conference of President Paul Kagame's Liberation Party, the Rwandan Patriotic Front in Kigali, as it celebrated its 35th anniversary. And Evans Mensah has been asking, who has been in, Rwanda, has been asking Ghana if we could take some lessons from their economic management module, not their democracy, quote-unquote democracy or political system. If you hear anybody tell you that story that Evans is saying we should have a dictator, they are telling a lie. He doesn't say any of that, close to that in his report. Let's listen to Dr. Donald Kaberuku.
That, for example, a country in West Africa, please no names, which was the first one to go to the IMF and begin general economic reforms, is back to the IMF today. Please, no names. Why? A combination of domestic indiscipline, macroeconomic indiscipline, and these external shocks. So as a result, they have lost what I call political space, fiscal space, policy space. The decisions they're now implementing are not their decisions. Why? Because during the days when things were very good, they did all the wrong things. They ticked all the wrong boxes. Massive borrowing, for example, massive spending, huge levels of the deficit, without building the resilience for when the days will be difficult. I can think now of about 14 countries in Africa who are in that phase. So the first thing I think our message we're passing is that restoring that degree of economic independence begins by economic discipline.
Right. Dr. Theo Champong, yes, briefly, what will be your comment or position on this? The businesses, business leaders are unanimous. They are speaking as never before in this country, saying what you are doing, you're going to muzzle, you're going to kill businesses even further.
Good morning. I understand where the business leaders are coming from, particularly given the environment that we find ourselves in with high inflation, the cost of borrowing up, and both Humphrey and the Gutta president have been at length to explain these issues. And of course, other people have also raised these concerns. But the point really also for me is that we need to make some trade-offs, right? So the short-term trade-offs, which is about increasing our revenue base, and particularly the government wanting to increase the tax to GDP from 13 to about 18% in the next couple of years. And then the long-term trade-offs about the overall growth of the economy and the ability to create jobs. That's the context within which I analyze these issues from. So if we take the three bills specifically, there are some of them that I actually support, and then others that I don't. And I'll explain that briefly in a moment. So the exercise duty bill and the details underpinning the bill, if you actually read the details, a number of the products that the taxes are going up is to do with things like spirits, with wines, with malt drinks, and with sweetened beverages and e-cigarettes and things like that. And we do know that these actually are having quite serious health consequences on the general population. So from a sort of health policy point of view, I support the attempt to actually raise the exercise duties on a number of these, line items for the malt drinks, the wines, and the spirits. Call it like a sugar tax in a sense, right? And then the same thing with the tobacco. Same argument could be made for the increment or the adjustment in some of the income taxes. But where I disagree with the government really is on the growth and the sustainability levy. Mr. Kwame Fianim talked about the excessive taxation. Interestingly, this levy, and it's important that our viewers understand this, this is actually not new. It is a metamorphosis of the fiscal stabilization levy that we've had over the years. So you can go all the way back to 2001 when we passed the National Reconstruction Levy, right? And at that time, it was a similar thing where some companies, with the exception of, I think it was banks and rural and community banks, that had an exemption from that levy, and they were paying an amount which worked all the way through from 2001 to 2006. And then we made an amendment to it and even collected more, but this time around included or expanded the scope to include things like insurance companies, breweries, banks, inspection and evaluation companies, and you name it. Then between 2010 to 2019, we made further adjustments or amendments to this National Reconstruction Levy, which became a National Fiscal Stabilization Levy in 2009. And then subsequently in 2023 now, we are proposing to change a bit of the name from this fiscal stabilization into growth and sustainability levy. So my point is that this levy has always been on our books in one shape or form over the last 22 years. The issue is that the import of the levy or the act is always meant to be temporary, but typically what is meant to be temporary now becomes permanent. So even this 2023 to 2025 timeline that the government is talking about for this new growth sustainability levy, I doubt that at the end of 2025 it will be off the books. It's very much going to be tweaked and it's still going to stay on our books. The details of the growth and sustainability levy and what the government wants to collect, I see some implementation challenges there, right? So they've categorized the companies into three bands. Group A or Category A, which includes the banks, the non-banks, the insurance companies, the people that already were paying the fiscal stabilization levy, the earlier one. Then there's two new additions, which is the inclusion of the mining and then the oil and gas companies. And for them, they're meant to pay 1% of their gross production. And there's a third category of 2.5% of profit before tax on any other entity or company that does not fall in the first two categories. So you see here that the scope is being widened to capture pretty much every company within the economy. But the issue is the issue of the excessive taxation, and specifically for the mining and the upstream companies, I struggle to see how the government is actually going to ask them to pay this tax because they have existing agreements, and within those agreements, you have these fiscal stabilization provisions that says that the government cannot go back and change or even impose future tax terms that would make the cost of doing business for them quite difficult. So most likely we'll see some of them, actually resorting to arbitration and triggering those clauses within their respective contract. Because the 1% tax that the government is charging on these extractive companies, in very simple terms, and again, for the purposes of our listeners, it is working like a royalty, right? Because these are not allowed to be deducted against their future corporate income taxes. So they would very much fight this, I think, tooth and nail. So in essence, what I see really is that the 4 billion target that the government has put together to raise from these three new tax handles, most likely it may not meet that 4 billion target. It would raise some money, definitely, but that 4 billion target may become a bit challenging to meet. But the short-term priority for the government really is to raise new or more revenue. There are other things that we can discuss around the expenditure and you name it. But this is where really the sort of policy drive is.
All right. Finally, what do you say what would be your comment on what Kwame Pinning has just told us? And he ends by clearly being unequivocal that the president should not even assent to this. And there's a man of God who said to me that this is like what happened in the Bible. Remember the rebellion against Rehoboam? He told the people that my father's finger is thicker than, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Whereas my father, burdened you with a heavy yoke, he said, I will add to your yoke. Whereas my father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. Is that what is going on? And the system, the refrain we hear is that reduce, your own expenditure. cut your coat according to your cloth. But that is not going on.
Yeah, look, the yoke is heavy. We have been burdened for a very long time, and it continues to be the case. I realistically don't see the president not signing onto this bill. We've got to be real here. I think there's an avenue for the president to maybe
they actually brought into parliament a sick man so that he could vote, because the minority were determined to vote against it.
It shows how dire the situation is in terms of meeting these benchmarks to get the IMF program going. What I think can be done, right, is some tweaks or an amendment to the bill, particularly the growth and sustainability bill. So, for example, it should be possible for the companies to reclaim these taxes back for the purposes of corporate income taxation, right? That would reduce or lessen the burden in a sense, but also improve the overall business environment. But the idea of actually scrapping it, given our history and what I've shown you, that this law or bill has been in some shape or form on our books for the last 22 years, I don't think it's going to be scrapped. But there's an avenue to tweak some component of it to ensure that you can, one, meet the target, but you can also get the compliance or the enforcement that you need from it.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Theo Echampong is a political risk analyst, very, very familiar with particularly the oil and gas industry, and has authored a book in that regard. Now, I am going to bring in Dr. Lloyd Amoah to help us gauge the situation with respect to seeking to get some reprieve by approaching China. And you know that he is a foremost expert when it comes to the matter of China and business, Ghana-China or Africa-China business relations. We have 1.7 billion US dollars that we owe to China that we are hoping will give us some reprieve. And we have gone trying to beg. We are being told that at one point we are told things appear to be moving on smoothly. At another point we are being told things are not moving as expected, because the projections that we had, including what the president expected will happen, has not happened. So, for example, listen to the president when he was bold, telling us when we are clinching a deal with the IMF.
Mm-hmm. Assistance to repair in the short term our public finances and restore our balance of payments, whilst we continue to work on the medium to long-term structural changes that are at the heart of our goal of constructing a resilient, robust Ghanaian economy and building a Ghana beyond aid. Reaching an agreement with the board of the fund, which we hope to do very soon, will set the stage for the strong recovery of Ghana's economy. We've gone to the international.
The economic situation of Ghana worries all of us, and the question of debt it is treated by Club of Paris, but not only, also from a common framework. I think the discussion with China and the role of China, it will be very, very important. So that's why I spoke to you about the importance of the common framework. But of course, we totally support, and we will be beside you for the action that will have to be undertaken by the IMF and also the World Bank, because the country needs to regain the economic stability.
Right, so here, that's the president you heard earlier, and then France seeking to, put in a word for us, is it? And as we understand, Beijing is the single largest holder of Ghanaian debts. With such a huge debt portfolio to China, it is impossible to restructure Ghana's external debt stock without China at the negotiation table. So you have followed that Ghana has been appealing to various nations to try and put in a word for us in China. And as we understand, even the World Bank is trying to do a bit of that for us, having actually made a statement and suggested to China that they have to be quick about this for Ghana. Dr. Lloyd Amwa, thank you so very much for making time to join us here on Newsfile. From your reading, how is this going for us? And how do we secure, China's blessing going forward? And I can imagine that the Paris Club and the rest of them, they will be a bit hesitant in how they deal with us. Everybody wants to see who is going to do what for Ghana at what time.
Well, thank you very much, Samson, for having me on. The line has been breaking a bit, but I hope you can hear me.
Very clearly.
Okay, fantastic. This essentially is a game of chess, not checkers. And Ghana essentially has been roped into the complex concourses of international geopolitics and geoeconomics. And essentially, we are facing, obviously, a debt problem. And this debt problem is tied to time. And so, in a sense, we are in a rush trying to meet deadlines involving the International Monetary Fund so that we get a program. My reading of the China scenario is in a bit of a bind. The Chinese just recently came off a massive meeting of the parliament, if you like, and key policy decisions were taken. Now, when you look at these decisions, you will see that China is trying to deal with its own internal issues, and is therefore seized by them. For example, if you look at the Chinese economy, the real estate side is presenting some problems to them. People have taken loans and all of that, and getting those loans back has become important for Chinese economists and those who run their finance side. Again, the issue of technology. As we all know, Huawei has the lead when it comes to 5G, fifth generation, telephony and all of that. And China is increasingly trying to move up and strengthen its technological muscle. But this is essentially being hampered by questions of microchips, and getting access to high performing microchips, which China has tended to depend on its supplies from Europe and especially America, Taiwan, and the rest of them. It doesn't have a foundry, or foundries to build the kind of especially high-end chips, especially the memory chips that it needs to more or less continue to deepen its technological capacity. So these are things that China is deeply worried about and is thinking about. At the level of international relations, the Taiwan question is niggling Chinese strategies. Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan recently. The Taiwan president now essentially made a stopover in the U.S. and met the third highest ranking personality in the American government. So all of these questions has China wanting to deal with this problem so that it would have a clear sense of where it is headed, strengthen its economy, allow it to become the kind of rival to the U.S., as it were. And here comes this little country, Ghana, that is not, in a sense, handling its economic questions the way it should. We owe China close to $2 billion US, and you know, we want the Chinese to, in a sense, help us restructure that. But we have to look at that in terms of China and its economy and its interests and all of that. You know, the Chinese have been supporting us over the last, 60 odd years. They have written off some of our debts during the Kufuor era, for example. They have made a lot of investments in China at the level of ODA, official development assistance, and all of that. Now, when you look at West Africa, Ghana ranks amongst the first three. If you look at the long durée, if you look at the data, going back 1958 to say 2014, Ghana ranks amongst the leading countries, first three, that the Chinese have supported in terms of projects, construction, and the rest of them. So I think that the Chinese will be facing a little bit of some fatigue with this country that it has tried to support. And yet, it doesn't seem that this country is turning the corner and standing on its own 2 feet. We must not forget that historically, China, vast territory, more population, more complicated geopolitical, geoeconomic reality. Before, the Chinese had to, for example, fall on the Japanese. They are sworn enemies historically to try and rebuild the Chinese economy. The Chinese had to fall on the World Bank, going in for loans and all of that. What was the record? The Chinese paid on time every loan that they took from the World Bank, and the literature is there. So why is it that a resource-endowed country, a particularly well-educated, a population for this country, a country with historically very important in Africa, is still not able to get its act together? And I think this is a big problem that would weigh in the moves that the Chinese will make on the chessboard and further complicates the Ghanaian case. And as we have seen, it's obvious that we are not getting the right sound bites. We are not getting the right feedback from the trip that the finance minister had. I mean, when you look at the key guys that we need to talk to, for example, Li Qiang, who is in a sense like Jironji, he's now the economic czar. This was the guy who was doing a lot of work when the reform and opening up period took place from 1978 upwards. He became governor of Zhejiang on the eastern side of China. He worked in Shanghai and all of that. These are hard-nosed guys who really saw China roll up its sleeves, go in there and engage the world. Special economic zones, bring in FDI, modulate these FDIs, direct them to proper areas that will benefit China and all of that. And here we are with a China that has risen and moved a chunk of its people, over 800 million by the data, out of poverty. Why is it that Ghana, since 1983, we've been running this neoliberal capitalist economy consistently? Why haven't we been able to turn the corner? And we go in for loans. We went into the what I call the casino mode. We were running essentially a casino economy, borrowing from the capital markets. And of course, you want to borrow, but you need to have some kind of strategic orientation in terms of what you want to do with that, because you have to pay the loan anyway, or the loans anyway. And then we get, hit by, events in the international political economy, and we seem to be teetering on the brink of collapse. So it's a difficult situation for Ghana vis-a-vis the Chinese. Their own history, where they came from, where they are, dictates to them that the Ghanaian case has become pathological.
All right, Dr. Lloyd Amoah. Hello, Dr. Lloyd Amoah.
Yeah.
Right. So, seeing that we have had the IMF chief, Kristalina Georgieva, tell, China's top economic official, that is Li Qiang, that they need to accelerate their work to reach debt restructuring agreements for countries like Zambia, Ghana, and Ethiopia. Do you think this will be accelerated in the manner that they expect?
Well, that's a tough question. The Chinese will have to make their own calculations in terms of their finances and how the Ghanaian aspect feeds into it. The idea that somehow or other, that because of our strain with the IMF and the fact that it's bound to time, the Chinese should therefore run for us, is in a sense, in many ways, a bit far-fetched, if not naive.
You have the United States and other Western countries that have faulted China for causing delays in setting up restructuring agreements for heavily indebted countries, that have asked for help under the common framework set up by the G20 major economies.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Yes. So if countries like the US and others are faulting China for causing delays in this process, what is it that we can do to get them to quickly get us to the next window that we are hoping we will get in March?
Well, we went
in May.
into these negotiations on our own volition. We went in with our own sense of what we wanted. We are a sovereign nation. Our governments are made of adults, And so we engaged China, on our terms in terms of where we wanted to go with the loans that we sought to secure and all of that. So the idea that China is the cause is wrong-headed. The case cannot be sustained. The argument cannot be made. The argument wobbles. It stands on very weak legs. So that aspect of any argumentation is rather laughable. I can imagine the Chinese strategists at John and I laughing their head off and saying, Ghana, you went, in other words, these Ghanaians, do they have a problem? Are they serious? So that argument cannot be made.
Okay.
Our best bet, in my view, lies less in American pressure, because note, the Americans recently passed an act, the Chips and Something Act, I remember the second word, which is looking at squeezing China in terms of its chip-making capacity and sending high technology to China and all of that, in order to, in effect, strangulate China and squeeze them, get them into a vice grip, so that they don't continue their upward technology march and rival the U.S., which the Chinese in many ways have surpassed when it comes to technology in key aspects. So the U.S. cannot, in my view, be the key queen on the chessboard to move China to support Ghana. Our best bet might be sympathy and the long historical, friendly, fraternal ties that our country has with China.
All right.
And that, to depend on that is dicey. And we are seeing that obviously, you know. And so I think that we are clearly in a very, very difficult place.
Okay.
China is attending to its own tactical strategic problems at the local and global level.
Okay.
And this poor Ghana, that doesn't offer in any way any far-reaching strategic benefits to them. Can at best be a peripheral entity that China might like to.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lloyd George Du Amwa of the Center for Asian Studies, University of Ghana, Legon. He will stay on with us to join Dr. Kojo Pumpunia Sante, Director, Advocacy and Policy Engagements at the CDD, and Reverend Dr. Fred Digbe of the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers on the matter that we will discuss very shortly. I'll take some very final comments from Joseph Obeng, President, Ghana Union of Traders Association, and Dr. Humphrey Ayim-Dake, President, Association of Ghana Industries. Listening to our, panelists with expertise on these matters of the economy, China relations, and everything, particularly concerning the issues that the AGI is actually doing a petition to the president. Okay, what do you have to say, finally? Yes, let me start with you, Doc.
Finally, as stated, on the trade-offs, as Dr. Teo mentioned, regarding the excise duty, where we believe there could be a tweak in favor of local industries, because if he argues from the perspective of health, we believe on the local front, you could strengthen the Food and Drugs Authority and the standardization, giving threshold for this sort of input to control it without using taxes. Secondly, on the same front, we believe in the context of industrialization that the president championed, aside the free SHS, industrialization 1D, 1F has been his mantra. We are praying to him that he shouldn't derail the industrialization agenda through this excise duty. He could be biased in favor of local industries production. If not, a common organic liquor like Akpeteshi in the local corner will attract excise duty. And I know colleagues that are packing Akpeteshi in Afro and in other related ones. Let it not be said that that is your case as you govern. And so that will be one of the interventions we seek from the president in that respect. Secondly, considering the deal that will be clinched through the IMF, our prayer is that the expenditure that will come to government should be focused on domestic market, such that this expenditure space will propel the agriculture space for one, as against importation of finished product like cars that will not stimulate the market. I know there are schools of thought of the wastage, some are of the opinion that don't cut expenditure, but channel it with areas in the local market that will propel the recovery from this recession speedily. But if it stands as it is, as the law is, without some tweaking, that will prolong the crisis in the recession space that we find ourselves. My last take will be on the concern on China and the comments by Lloyd, that what might be the approach. We haven't seen the report of the minister. So granted that we have, that would have given us a lead onto how to engage further than to speculate. And in the absence of the report, we can use our business contacts and network in China, knowing the same one or two other persons that have been involved in the negotiation, to see the trend and the thinking of the Chinese community or the leadership on this said matter. And then with that engagement, we can then lobby through other parties that could speed up. So I will not go for the speculative approach that Lloyd adapted on the geopolitical and the areas of specialization and the priority of China. Once they have attached importance to international issues, that will be our focus. So I appeal to the president, please, Our prayer is, thou shalt not derail the industrialization agenda of Ghana. Thank you.
One of your major concerns, Joseph Obing, has been that consultation has been lacking. Civil society have joined you to say this is becoming characteristic of this government. It simply doesn't consult. Or sometimes after everything else is done and there's a complaint, then it says we are going to consult. And that is actually not consultation. They just embark on an information exercise. These appeals that you are making, what is the level of assurance you have that they will be listened to at all? And must you end at that? Because that's the question being asked. Even though whatever is happening affects the generality of the citizenry, should you stop at just appeals?
Okay. The situation that we find ourselves is quite dicey. Otherwise, there are so many things under our sleeves that we could have done. Because we have given the authority to governance. The actions of Parliament was uncalled for. Because Parliament did not listen to the people of Ghana.
Is it Parliament or the government? Because it was a majority. It was just one vote difference.
We have petitioned through the Speaker himself, and then Parliament, and then all the press releases, and then the petitions, and then the pleas they did not consider. Now
The MPs say they represent their constituents.
Yeah.
So what it means is that, as far as they are concerned, they have listened to you.
They never listen to us, and we are disappointed. They do not represent themselves. They do not represent their own interests, neither do they represent the political parties that they belong. It's very unfortunate that the democracy that we practice here shouldn't be seen that we are practicing democracy of imposition.
You are very familiar with how our politics works and the Parliament. Everything by government, majority sees it as correct, good. Minority will see it as wrong. And this one, the minority went in even with statements that they had issued ahead of time and said they would not support this. And yet the majority passed it.
Should it be the way to go? It's very unfortunate. We are the people.
So that gives you an idea. What can you do? Because the appeals won't work, some will tell you.
You see, I've told you this thing is dicey because we still want government to get some confidence into the system by going to the IMF so that it will help all of us. So any decision that we take otherwise may not augur well for the government and then the business community at that. And so all that we are seeking is that we have to engage with government even before they are sent to this bill or law. We've submitted our petition through the newly appointed Minister of Trade to be given to the President. And then the assurance have been given that we'll have to engage us as soon as possible. We are expecting that. But then they should know that we have good intention. We don't know. Because this is a country for all of us.
It's been passed in the state that you don't want. The only way out is a revocation of it, or the president refusing to assent it and doing a whole process all over again in Parliament. Is that what you're looking for?
You know, even Theo was saying that there could be some
amendments.
Amendment and all that. There's a lot, because IMF is not pushing anything that will destroy industries, and that anything that we send as an alternative that will ensure the same results that they are expecting, they will accept it. And that's why we are saying that we still have the opportunity to sit down. We are not to rush into anything that will kill us eventually. I hope you understand that.
All right.
And that's why we are calling on the government to, as early as possible, sit down with this and judge all. And then when we have a solution, then we all owe it together, and then government can even succeed on that quest.
And to think that the economic model of a country that was ravaged by genocide and left an estimated 800,000 people slaughtered is now the reference for us to look at. That country, Rwanda, is now the country ranked first on the continent among the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world, pre-COVID and post-COVID, according to the African Development Bank. What a sad situation. Thank you all for your time. We'll be right back to ask the question, how does the government and the party, NPP, continue to justify the appointment of these two individuals in the face of the evidence that is beginning to unravel even more? We'll be right back.